The gentleman with the stash.
Yes, thank you. Art Tritter is my name. I'm with the Department of Planning and Community Development in the policy area. Your work seems to, a lot of work you've discussed seems to focus on cities. We here in Australia have cities, but we also have huge, what I would call sub-cities, or suburban. We are still building huge, what I also call CARBERs, car-dependent suburban areas. And I was curious as to social needs and social innovation that you've come across for these sub-cities. If there are some of the likenesses, some of the areas that we already know about, and some of the areas that are quite different and unique and need a different approach.
Well, one of my colleagues, who's a senior fellow at the Young Foundation, brought out a book at the end of last year called The Freedoms of Suburbia. It's a deliberately provocative book on why suburbs are wonderful things. We don't all share this view completely, but essentially, to slightly caricature his position, the position is that the urbanists, the architects, the planners, generally are hostile to suburbs. They want people to live in compact cities, to sort of drink in sort of cafes like Spain or Italy, and sort of walk around. And yet, most people want to live in suburbs with big gardens, sense of space, tree-lined streets. And there's, for several decades, been a real clash between the usually quite elite sort of urban experts and public revealed preferences. And this book by Paul Barker sort of essentially goes through why are suburbs in fact quite good places, why the communities in fact work quite well in suburban environments, even though the theories say they shouldn't, and isn't it better to sort of go with the grain of that than against it. It's particularly important for public housing, because in a country like Britain, public housing has always been designed, not by the people living in the public housing, but by, again, the experts, and designed to be as different from what people would freely choose as it possibly could be, i.e. large slabs of apartments, you know. And wouldn't it be better if we always designed public housing so no one could tell it was public housing? So it went with the grain of choice and looked suburban. I mean, that's a slightly provocative caricature bit of the answer. One of the things which is fascinating me, and I know quite live here as well, is what is happening in social innovation in suburbs in several spaces. And the one which I live a little bit, I live in a semi-suburb, I guess, is urban agriculture, where particularly since the downturn you missed 2 years ago, what's been quite a slow trend has dramatically accelerated, and that's the trend to seeing was every bit of land in a suburb as productive land. I, in my back garden, keep chickens and bees and grow vegetables. All our local schools now, have allotment plots where the children grow things. The Mayor of London is trying to get every rooftop turned into a sort of food growing space. And this is largely being driven by the suburbs. And in terms of the vision, the transition town movement you might have heard of, which is trying to sort of pave the way to low or even zero carbon living, is largely a small town and suburban phenomenon of people trying to move to much more local food sourcing, much more walking instead of car use, etc., etc. And it is interesting to say this is a sociological phenomenon that is largely suburb driven. And likewise, the best examples of new sort of social capital-based care models for the elderly, mobilising volunteers or young elderly for the elderly, are all taking place in suburbs, and it's much harder to get them off the ground in urban areas. So I don't really know the answer to your question, but I think it's important to be not to sort of go with the grain of the classic, certainly European elite contempt for the suburb, but instead to ask, what is it that people are really, that still is attracting them in such large numbers to that kind of way of living? And how do we then make it actually ecologically sustainable with less car use?